All right, hey everyone, welcome back. This is How We Innovate. Dr. Brent Siebold here, Hugh Curry Law Professor of Entrepreneurship, along with my co-host and
Hi,
my
guys.
benefactor, Michael Houle. Michael, good to see you.
Thank you, too.
So we have a guest joining us all the way from Austin, Texas, one of the amazing startup hubs in the U.S. A lot of Sun Devils representing really smart people coming out of the ASU ranks, living, working, and innovating within Austin. And our guest here today is Mathew. Leo, so good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Leo has founded a company called Applied Novel Innovations. Go ahead, Leo.
It's Applied Novel Devices. You can call us A&D, as in and.
I love it. A&D in Austin, Texas, founded by a proud Sun Devil. So, Leo, thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear how you got started. What's been your journey as a technology founder coming out of ASU?
Sounds good. So let me just briefly tell our story, specifically my story into that. As some of you all might know, I started my career out with Motorola in the early 90s and was designing power devices. These are, in our language, we call them God devices because they're all over the place, but nobody knows they're there. Everybody knows microprocessors, everybody knows stuff in the car, but all of them are turned on and off with power electronics and specifically this part called power MOSFETs. So while I was there at Motorola, it actually designed a record number of power MOSFETs that go into everything, pretty much, Apple computers to Cisco routers, all the cars, Ford, GM, everybody. So pretty much they all use our power MOSFETs. Around that time, I moved to Austin because, regular technology called CMOS technology, what you can now hear as 30 nanometer, 5 nanometer technologies, they were looking for how do we change this from the way the industry was scaling for almost 3 decades. And I realized this very close to this new architecture that we could come up with vertical MOSFETs. They're now being called FinFETs, but there were all kinds of names when I first started, and all kinds of different competing technologies. And I moved to Austin so we could actually start making regular semiconductor devices using what used to be pretty common in power MOSFETs, except at much smaller scales. And of course, these days those are called FinFETs. They are in every single semiconductor part that you would use. And around that time, there was a plan in Motorola to try to spin off some new ideas and new companies. And a small core team wanted to go out and do something. But then a lot of corporate things started happening, and the company became Freescale, and Freescale was getting into alliances with other companies, and all this startup ideas and all those were shelved. And in the meantime, the industry was also moving to a point where a lot of manufacturing and very what we call hard tech, as in semiconductor device manufacturing kind of things, were moving outside of the US. In one way, we thought this is going to be good. To take an idea to market takes about 10 years. It's not like software where we can start writing a version and you can start selling and upgrading things. When you do anything in hardware, you're talking 10 years of your life that you need to, take a bet on, and your team needs to stick with you to do that. So we still felt it was worth it, and we felt things will turn around at some point. We never anticipated it'll take this long to turn around and a pandemic to turn around, but it has. Out in the trenches over the last 10 years, we've actually come up with multiple new technologies, and we are finally going into production by converting an old fab that was going to be shut down in Minnesota. So we are also working with other foundries to, bring our product to market and customers. Along the way, we've tried to do a lot of things that is easy to say in business books, but very, very hard to do in our personal lives. Okay, to make sure that you stick with your story, change your story where you need to, and most importantly, what I would, people call about being a startup like this is it's really a leaking bucket, because you need to spend a lot of money and you need to have money flowing in. So how do you make sure that you spend and collect money while you're small, while you still don't have water coming into the buckets as you would like to, no revenues yet, and a big grand idea where everybody else is a multi-billion-dollar or a state-backed player. So that's really been our story, but we have somehow figured out ways to do that, mainly by having also other services that help our revenues, sticking to, raising just the right amount of money. So gives us many cycles of learning. And here we are. Applied Novel Devices actually now has a family of products that we have just started talking with our customers and bringing into volume production in a fab that was almost going to die. So we are bringing in our process there. So we're proud of our story. And I think a lot of it, credit goes to actually folks at ASU. I was very fortunate to have an advisor called Jim Fordemwalt. Dr. Jim Fordemwalt actually came from Motorola, but he used to work with the greats. He was there only for a few years, and he actually was there just to teach because he came there after he had won a major lawsuit. He was an expert witness for Intel and others for ion implantation. He used to work with Shockley and then later with other companies that Shockley and others founded. Really a lot of my work and motivation came from Dr. Jim Fordemwalt while I was there. So thanks to ASU for giving that opportunity and this opportunity now to talk to you all. And hopefully you guys find it to tell your stories 10 years down the line or hopefully earlier. Good luck. Thank you.
Hey, Leo, this is Michael. A couple things that you mentioned piqued an interest for me. One is how you got, to where you are from Motorola. Were you part of? Did they have some kind of entrepreneurship, concept, where within the company they were encouraging people?
Yes, they were absolutely encouraging us, and they were just about starting it when everything just completely went downhill.
So how did you get to where you launched your company? Did you leave Motorola and then just...
Yes, I did. I quit. I made sure that I had all the IP that I wanted to work with them, made sure that, they were okay with anything that I wanted to work on.
Yeah.
Made sure that anything that needed to be transferred to them was transferred, and they were willing to help me go ahead and do startup, but all on my own. So basically, a couple of us quit, put our own money in. There was also a very early stage investor, but that was more a notional investment, but a great sign of support because he was a senior person in the industry. So we actually had no funding from anyone for about the first 6 months that we were making proposals.
Can I pause you just for a second? Because the funding is a big thing to talk about, and I want to make sure we cover that because that's always a common question. But you mentioned one thing that's really critical for a lot of, and it applies in a lot of different circumstances. One of the things you mentioned was you made sure that you basically had a free pathway with your intellectual property, and you worked it out with Motorola so you didn't have any problems. So that's something that's really important for entrepreneurs to know. If they're creating any kind of IP within another company or another institution and they want to go start a company, they need to be thinking about that, sort of like you did with Motorola.
Absolutely. Yeah, the last thing you want is to make your friends enemies, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was definitely one of the things that when we started, we wanted to make sure that our current company was okay with it. But they definitely went from wanting to support financially and it being part of a company and all that to they were not going to do any of those programs.
That's great. That's very smart that you did that. So one of the things you mentioned was, and I don't want to hog the conversation, I'll tee this up a little on the financing. But you said we raised as much money as we needed along the way. Can you explain that a little? Because entrepreneurs, quite often, one of the questions is how much should we be looking for? Should we raise more than we need? How do we know what we need? Because the early money that you bring in is the most expensive money you're going to get. So talk through your thinking on that.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends upon what business you're in, right? So there are actually businesses where you can just raise as much as you can is the right advice. and you should do that when you can. So it typically works out for any product that can go into revenue, even with your prototype. Nobody's going to buy a semiconductor device prototype. They need things that are almost in volume, and even with volume, that's not sufficient. It needs, second factories in multiple continents before somebody can pull the trigger and say, "I want your part." Okay. So it's really a great advice for people who do software service aggregation. Let's say I'm going to bring food that somebody else makes to your doorstep, or your book to your doorstep. I'm writing code that will make an internet-based .com, or an aggregator of some kind of service. For all of those, raise as much money as you can so you can survive until you make a profitable outcome out of it is a great advice. But the key is you can get to revenues right away. Your people visit your website, you get revenues. You may be losing money like crazy, but you raised enough money. So that's the advice for those kind of guys. But for us, that does not work. Nobody is going to buy your part until it is tested, reliability tested. Nobody's going to buy a solar panel just because you make a solar panel. It needs to be in a factory. It needs to be, in very big volume for it to actually make you money. And even if there are people willing to give you money, it doesn't necessarily mean you will survive all kinds of summers and winters. So you need to be very careful how appropriately you raise your money, because there's a lot of stories about bad VCs and things like that. That's not really true. They're in there to make money. They want to see a good business case. And the first time they see trouble and you're off of what you promised, they do not want to continue with you, right? For a good reason. So the expectation, if you go raise venture money, is that you're going to hit, a home run the way you promise. But invariably in anything, there will be trouble, especially when you're trying to do hardware, and that too semiconductor devices. So making sure that there are options for cycles of learning. It's great to say I'll go out and raise $1 billion. It does not happen.
So when you raised money for your product being a hardware, focus, did you raise certain amounts to achieve certain milestones in the product development and then go out and raise more? How did you, what was your strategy?
Yeah, we did not raise any money from private capital until we actually got to a certain prototype. And it was actually kind of interesting how it happened for us. So we actually decided we needed some technicians that needed to work with us, but somebody needs to make sure they're paid regularly. What we needed to do was to make sure that in addition to what they were working on with us, we actually negotiated with their employees. For example, some of them are full-time employees in other semiconductor companies that also come work with us in our lab. And we make sure that there are other projects that are service revenues that make sure that they are full-time employed. They've all been employed with us, about 4 of them for the last 10 years to make sure that their families are fed, there's food on the table. And so we, at around 6 months, we got our first revenues for service contracts. And then we started applying for SBIRs and other government funding. So we actually were able to at least get the government to understand that this is important. And since then, we've been between service revenues and other government grants, we've been able to get our prototype ready. Once we had our prototype, we were completely in stealth mode until then. We had our first press where we presented in a conference. And that's when a very big investor actually contacted us, a fairly hands-on person who started a semiconductor company before and runs a $3 billion investment arm. He said, if your part is actually any good compared to your competitor, I'm going to go ahead and invest in you. The email came to us at 9. We thought it's one of those, fake emails. It was a Gmail email. And we thought, but then he used a very specific technical term that felt like nobody is going to know this. And we said, okay, how about we have a meeting and we can talk? And then around 10 o'clock, we had a meeting that went on all the way up to 1 o'clock, and he said, okay, I'm going to invest in your company. That's when we
Nice.
So and that is really my big advice to especially folks who are going to do solar or things like that. It's going to, unless you're going to be in a position where you can get to revenues fast, be very careful about how much money you raise, because there will be many cycles of mistakes and learning that you need to go through. And going and making a great story is very hard, but that's the easiest part. Because people will give you the benefit of the doubt. If you say you're going to go hit $20 million in revenue in the first year, they will give you the benefit of the doubt. But if you don't hit that, you're immediately zero, and you're looking at disbanding your team, the nasty stuff. So,
Leo, great advice. Really appreciate you sharing your story with us. We're joined here today by two of our student founders, early stage founders here at ASU, Zach Ludi, who's, as you mentioned, in the solar space, and Max Bregman, who's in both the hardware and the software stack development space. So, gents, thanks for joining and listening in to Leo's founding story. Do you have any questions for Leo? Or else Michael has probably 10 more.
Or I can just keep talking.
Yeah, well, thank you for having us, Brent. And I think you really hit the nail on the head, Leo, with this topic of prototyping and speed to market with, as fast as you can with your minimum viable product. And what I want to understand is what kind of scale or what kind of size was the company at? What did you guys need to develop this prototype and minimum viable product?
Okay, maybe I'll go ahead and share a couple of slides so you get an idea of what we're talking about. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, how many employees? Like, were you guys in the phase of building the product in the lab?
Yeah, when we started, it was just two of us, the founders, and come up to about 10 folks, but it's a much bigger team now. Am I sharing?
Yep.
Yes, you are. It's a motley crew.
All right. Do you see there? That's our team. Okay. It consists of some investors. The person you see with the whitest hair there, that's actually Dr. Jerry Fossum. He's a big guy in the industry. And the person on the extreme right of your picture, Dr. Sanjay Banerjee. Those two are professors and who are advisors, one from University of Florida and one from here at UT. The lab you see in the back is where we actually pay to use and develop our parts. So that's something you guys can tap into. ASU, I'm sure, has all kinds of labs and spaces that you could potentially pay and partner and figure out how to come up with hardware prototypes. Okay. And there are a couple of others are not in this picture. They are technicians and others who work with us, but they work also at this lab and in other facilities. Okay. So this next slide here is really our part. It's if you see on the left, that's an 8-inch wafer with a lot of power MOSFETs in it. There's about 9,000 on them. On the middle is actually one of our innovations where we made the silicon extremely thin, about 30 microns. Usually these things just break into a million pieces, but we figured out a way how to still handle them. And that's one of our innovations. And on the right is something that happened over the last 2 years. We really thought this is going to be packaged somewhere in Asia. But with all the COVID-related issues, it became such a challenge that we didn't anticipate, and we decided to go ahead and package it and make it ourselves and start prototyping. So in the bottom, there's a lot of figure of merits on how this device looks and things like that. We can skip all that. Okay. So I'm going to actually talk one more thing about our founders here. So myself and Rajesh Rao are the founders of this company. And I like to put up that picture on the right there to show how things have changed in the industry. So the picture on the right that you see there, that is actually one of my patents, which I wrote while I was in Motorola, and Motorola owned it. But right now, that's actually the part that Intel and TSMC and Samsung and all are actually fighting about. It's called, the 5 nanometer technology with the gate all around. But you'll be surprised that that technology actually is owned by TSMC and it's cross-licensed across. So that's how the industry has changed. We actually, when we were talking with our folks in Motorola, that's the part that we wanted to try and make because Motorola was not fully sure they can commit to it. But it turned out we couldn't do it there. When we went out and talked to some of our potential partners, they all said, no, we will not fund you because you will be competing against our potential customers. So we'd be a small company trying to make that and competing against, say, the Intels and the TSMCs of the world. So a lot of people that were potentially going to be funding us if we licensed this out of Motorola just did not want to do it. So we didn't do that. We decided we want to have some more control of what we make. It should be a product that we make. So we completely changed, and we had other ideas. So that's what we ended up making that thin silicon power MOSFET, which we could brand and we could make ourselves. Okay.
Yeah, Leo, what was the key aspect for you guys to decide to make this decision from just being a chip designer and instead being a chip maker? Because that's certainly a really big step in the industry.
We were not a chip designer. Our background was all in semiconductor process and device. Okay? So that pattern that you see there and those cross section, they're all semiconductor devices that get made in wafers and all the chemistry and physics that goes into making it. That's our background. Well, the difference is if you made the device that's shown on the right, you either have to be a huge foundry like TSMC, or you need to be a factory plus product maker like Intel. Even though the idea was great, what we found out was it's not for a small company because we cannot sell it. At best, we could be a patent troll and write up a patent around the, or things that additionally help this. And that was not what we wanted to do. We wanted to make a product that will actually make a big difference. And we found out that there were not investors willing to do this because, as you can see, and they were right, there was great feedback. They said, even if we made this and they funded us, we'll be competing against their existing, much bigger customers. So we decided that's not what we were going to work on. Okay. So one more thing, I would give us great advice for you. We like to joke that we work with the guys who wrote the book on this. So the guys on the left, Dr. Jerry Fossum and Dr. Sanjay Banerjee, they are the authors of these two books. Our devices are based on what's called thin body MOSFETs. So go get as many good advisors as you can to be technical advisors, or preferably also advisors like Kevin at the bottom. He couldn't attend today, but he's been with us all along. And, they give you very, very good feedback to make sure that you're not hurting yourself or, how to guide yourself through this whole startup game.
It's fantastic. Mm-hmm. So Leo, related to your previous illustration of your founding team, could you tell us maybe a little bit more about your relationship with Dr. Rao, your co-founder?
Yeah. So
how did you two get together?
Yeah. Rajesh is he came from Duke. He's a material scientist. And he was working parallelly while we were working on what is now called FinFETs at the labs in Motorola. He was working on what was called nanocrystal memories for industrial applications. So that's when I knew him. And we were together when we went to Motorola's management to do a startup and things like that. So that's kind of how we said, let's go forward with this. Okay. And Dr. Vishal Trivedi is a co-author of this book. I used to work with him while he was still a student at University of Florida and when he wrote this book. And he joined us about a year or so after we got funded. Okay.
Great. Well, it's actually your story of how your co-founders got together is similar to a story Max has shared with us about meeting one of his co-founders or multiple co-founders. So, Max, do you have any questions for Leo?
Yeah, so I know that you met him working at Motorola, but taking that jump from, your job at Motorola, you're working on the different technology, but then making that your full-time thing, what were some of the key factors that made you make that jump?
I always wanted to try and do a startup. I don't know why. It was never because you didn't like my job. So I guess that's one of those things that, deep down in us, we feel like I want to go do something on my own feeling. And the other thing was I also found that many of the ideas we had, they would become patents and sit on the shelf. That's when we took it up to Motorola and said, hey, why not we come up with an idea of multiple people having small teams that would actually do this. And there are companies that used to do that a lot. It died down and then it came back up again where, the Googles of the world do that now. So that's actually a very good opportunity for folks to find entrepreneurial scope within big companies. So, for example, Google has a lot of startups that come out of it, right? So, it's just that nobody was doing these kind of, where you're doing a lot of chemistry and physics and manufacturing related R&D, because over the last 3 decades or so, it's honestly been so much easier to go in and do something in software or something maybe in systems, or invariably in integrating some service that's already out there. So it's been sucking out the oxygen out of this kind of work, but things have changed. So, could be interesting for you guys.
Yeah, and one follow-up with that. So I've heard a lot of different analogies with finding a co-founder. Like, it's like a marriage, like you spend maybe more time with them than your partner. Like, what were some of the decisions that, besides just like working with him, but what were some of those decision makers that were like, yes, I want him to be my co-founder for this project?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You end up spending a lot more time with your co-founder than with your family. But and you don't spend too much time with other people, so you better find your co-founders well, and hopefully it works out. Okay, that is really where a lot of things, the chemistry does not work out. And in our case, we found out as long as we keep away from each other's hair as far as personal things, and where we try to genuinely help each other out, then it works out. But I know a lot of teams that are broken up within a week of after. It's really genuinely like committing to a marriage. Okay, so you got to find out a way to live with them until things take off. So and once they take off, it becomes much bigger team. So you deal with a lot of other people, and so things are okay. It's the early stages because you're mostly dealing with each other with a lot of stress, a lot of unknowns, and you all have your own families and things to take care of. So very, very good question. These are questions that never get asked in business school or other places, but absolutely that is going to be a make or break for any team.
Hey, Leo, there's one thing you mentioned that I want to see if I can draw out a little bit. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that I've worked with that have come out of institutions like Motorola, Intel, and particularly the engineers that, they have the entrepreneur gene in them. And I've always had the view that you either have the gene or you don't. And if you do have it, you can only suppress it for so long, and eventually it'll force its way out to the surface. So, what I've learned is engineers within these big companies, they get kind of used to, the security and everything that's associated with that. But at the same time, they want to take their project, their idea out into the marketplace and give it a shot. So what are some of the things that led you to feel comfortable that I can go ahead and make that step? Sometimes it's like, I'll just give you one example. I worked with some gentlemen out of Intel, and for them, it was understanding that there were like-minded people in the community that they could go associate with and feel support. But I don't know. What was your experience of taking that step?
It's pretty much similar, really. I mean, initially you wonder, you're in a very comfortable space, and you see the kind of capital and team that are needed to actually go make something happen. But actually, the real place where you find the answer is to go back and see, hey, who founded your company? They always were not this big. Do you fit the profile of your immediate manager that you want to move up to, or do you fit the profile of the founder of Motorola?
That's great.
And you see, hey, I seem to like being Bob Galvin, and he started off making this small.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he made a small radio rectifier for a car and then built it into this company. Versus, I look up at a couple of my managers, and their goal and time horizon is, how can I go become vice president of this company? Yeah, it just didn't motivate me to be vice president of XYZ or even the CEO of this place. But I would have happily failed trying to be Bob Galvin and trying to make a rectifier. And if I sold only 1 million, it was just fine. So that's really what you're talking about. Is there a craziness in you to see, do you want to be the VP crazy, or do you want to be the founder of the company crazy? So
no, thank you. That was great. That was great insight.
Hey, Leo. Really appreciated your analogy that you shared with us earlier about the leaky bucket. So maybe you could tell us, when we work with early stage entrepreneurs here at ASU, we're very much focused on crystallizing who is the user, and more importantly, in many cases, who's ultimately going to pay for your new product, your new service, your new invention. So I notice you have a diagram here that you're sharing with us visually. Could you talk about your business model a little bit, about who your payer is? Where's the money coming to fill the bucket?
Yeah, so invariably there could be different kinds of people who would want to pay for your parts, right? So in our case, as you can see there in that slide, the picture looks awesome on who are the people using our parts. And like I said, pretty much everybody, whether it is your cell phone charger or an electric train, bus, it doesn't matter. I mean, anything that's electrical and electronics, there is a power MOSFET that looks like what's shown at the bottom, some version or the other. So that's our part. But who would want to pay two guys who want to go and make a new power MOSFET? It used to be there were a lot of people about 60 years or so ago, it looks like, because we go and look at all these companies. Each of those are different companies founded by people that had ideas here. But it completely dried out about 20 years ago. And we found out that the only people who were really willing to fund that to some extent were folks like NSF, Department of Energy, folks like that. And they have this SBIR kind of programs. That's the government. And then there are people who you meet along the way who know you personally and say, hey, I'm willing to throw in some money, which I'm willing to lose, as long as you guys can build a team. And they are the kind of people who do that. And then what happens when the industry turns around and something is really hot, you could definitely go raise a lot of money from venture capitalists, but you need to just get your story right so you can deliver to it.
It's fantastic. Leo, thanks so much for joining us here. If you're willing to, I'd love to continue the dialogue here with Michael and maybe get into a little bit more of a informal Q&A in our next segment. But as we wrap up this piece, Max and Zach, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. And Leo, thanks for coming back virtually to Arizona State University here in Tempe, all the way from Austin.
Looking forward to come there again in person. By the way, we do have one of our persons actually works in Phoenix. And we've done work with ASU for some of the things that we've shown here. So tap into UT Austin and other places that you guys have other contacts with, family and all that. So good luck with your effort, guys. And thanks so much for inviting me.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you.